Emily Walker didn't know what she was looking for when she set foot in the Appalachian Mountains, only that she needed to leave everything from the war behind. But then, deep within the thick mist of old, whispering hollow trail, she found them, a gaunt German shepherd and her shivering pups buried beneath layers of fallen leaves. And not just them, a strange hand reaching up from the earth, a sight that would haunt Emily forever. Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story pulls you in, don't forget to subscribe. Now, get ready, because what happens next will stay with you long after the story ends. Emily Walker didn't know exactly how long she had been on the road. Days and nights blurred together as her old pickup truck rattled along the winding roads of the Appalachian Mountains, carrying little more than a few changes of clothes, a half-eaten pack of granola bars, and the weight of her past. She was a former U.S. Army specialist, barely 30 but feeling decades older. The war had taken more from her than she cared to admit. Friends, peace of mind, and Daniel, the man she thought she would spend the rest of her life with. Each mile she put between herself and her old life felt like a small victory, yet also an admission that she had no real plan. All she knew was that she had to keep moving, keep driving, until the nightmares stopped, or until she was too exhausted to run from them anymore. Sometimes memories of combat seeped into her thoughts with brutal clarity, the relentless sun beating down on them during desert patrols, the smell of dust and sweat, the crackle of radio chatter signaling danger. Other times she recalled nights when mortars lit up the sky like distorted fireworks, forcing her unit to take cover behind crumbling walls. Through each recollection she could almost hear Daniel's voice, steady and warm, urging her to push on. He had been her anchor and her solace, until the day she held him in her arms, choking on his own blood after an IED blast. That final image was etched into her mind. Daniel trying to speak, unable to form words, his eyes begging her to forgive him for leaving. She had wanted to scream, to beg him not to go. But the moment was mercilessly fast. When he was gone, something in her cracked, leaving a silent, hollow space where hope used to live. From that day forward, she found no rest, only an endless road. It was in late autumn that she found herself driving along a narrow, winding route framed by towering maples, their leaves a vivid patchwork of gold, crimson, and burnt orange. She noticed a small, weathered sign pointing down a side road, Old Whispering Hollow. The name tugged at a distant memory. Her mother had once told her tales of hidden hollows and secret trails weaving through the Appalachians, places where the old magic of the mountains still whispered in the wind. Emily slowed the truck. A thick mist clung to the forest floor like a living thing, swallowing the path ahead. Part of her wanted to turn back. Another part, the restless, unmoored soldier, felt a flicker of curiosity. She killed the engine, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and stepped out into the damp, cool air. At first she was struck by the hush that enveloped everything. No distant hum of highways, no echo of gunfire or heavy machinery, just the faint rustle of leaves as a breeze wound through the pines and oaks. Now and then, a crow's call broke the silence, and she caught glimpses of black wings flitting between branches overhead. The path itself was not much more than a thread of trodden earth, winding between moss-laden trunks. Each step she took sent a soft whisper of fallen leaves skidding across the ground. The deeper she ventured, the more the world seemed to close in around her, as if the forest itself intended to test her resolve. Her mother's voice drifted back. There are places in these mountains where time stands still. Emily, you can lose or find yourself among these trees. At the recollection, a small pang of grief mingled with the persistent ache left behind by the war. She was losing herself, all right, but she wasn't sure she'd ever be found again. She walked for nearly an hour, letting her thoughts swirl until a sudden sound snapped her out of her day. A whine, soft, weak, and unmistakably canine. Emily froze, instantly alert. Army training told her to tread carefully. She crouched beside a thicket, scanning the undergrowth. Another whimper rose, faint and tremulous. Emily parted the branches, heart beating fast. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. A German shepherd, painfully thin, her ribs visible beneath dull, patchy fur. The dog's eyes flashed with a mix of fear and desperation. Beneath the shepherd's belly lay 4 tiny puppies, their fur matted and soaked, each trembling in the cold. Emily instinctively reached out a gloved hand, though she knew the mother dog might snap or bolt at any sudden movement. Instead, the shepherd merely stared, exhausted beyond aggression. Her pups gave weak cries, shivering against her. Emily's stomach lurched. The scene mirrored something she felt in her own bones, a survivor's will clinging to life, no matter how bleak the odds. Slowly, she spoke, her voice a rasp. "Easy there, I'm not going to hurt you." It occurred to her that these words were as much for herself as they were for the dog. She didn't want to hurt anything or anyone anymore. Cautiously, Emily knelt down. She remembered Daniel telling her once that dogs could sense intentions. She hoped that was true. Inch by inch she edged closer, lowering her hand for the mother to sniff. The dog's nostrils flared, and for a moment Emily feared she might get bitten. Instead, the shepherd let out a weary sigh. Emily interpreted that as surrender. "Good girl," she whispered, carefully brushing aside a layer of damp leaves that had nearly buried one of the pups. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The mother dog's gaze shifted between Emily's eyes and her pups, as if begging for help. Just then, Emily's peripheral vision caught an odd shape rising from behind the dog. A massive, moss-covered formation that jutted out of the ground at a slant. The shock of seeing it nearly made her topple backward. It appeared to be a giant hand carved out of stone, the fingers partially curled and thick as tree limbs. Tendrils of ivy and creeping vines wove around it, as if nature had tried to reclaim this ancient remnant. A chill slithered through Emily's spine. If the dog and her pups were a stark reminder of the world's cruelty, this stone hand felt like something else entirely. A remnant of a different time, exuding a silent, inexplicable presence. She blinked, trying to recall if there were any monuments or bizarre art installations rumored in these parts. Her mother had never mentioned anything like that, nor had the local folklore about old spirits and hidden hollows. Feeling as though drawn by an unseen force, Emily extended her free hand toward the stone. The surface felt cold at first, then oddly warm, as if there was a heartbeat within. And in that dizzying moment, she felt the war come flooding back. Screams in the distance, dust in the air, Daniel's final breath. It was as if the stone was pulling at her memories, teasing out her ghosts. "Enough," she whispered harshly, snatching her hand away. She had the distinct, unnerving sense that if she lingered, she might slip into a past she couldn't escape. Turning her attention back to the shepherd, she steeled herself. "I can't leave you here, can I?" The mother dog blinked weakly, pressing closer to her quivering pups. Emily swallowed the knot in her throat. For the first time in far too long, she felt compelled to do something besides run. Gathering her courage, Emily gently slid off her army jacket. She wrapped 2 of the pups in its folds, scooping them against her chest. The shepherd let out a soft whine, half protest, half accept. "Easy," Emily murmured, draping a torn flannel shirt over the other 2 puppies. Then, mustering all her strength, she lifted the mother dog into her arms as well. The dog was lighter than Emily expected, all bones and angle, but the combined weight of the mother and pups still made her muscles tremble. She took one last glance at the giant stone hand, its shadow stretching across the forest floor as dusk settled. A voice inside her whispered that this was important. This bizarre statue, this battered dog family, and her own battered heart were linked in ways she couldn't begin to understand. By the time Emily stumbled out of the woods, her lungs burned from exertion. Twilight bathed the road in a bruise-colored glow. She loaded the shepherd and her pups into the passenger seat of the truck as gently as possible, then slid behind the wheel. The engine coughed and sputtered, but eventually roared to life. "All right, hang in there," she murmured to the dog, who gazed at her with an unrateable mix of fatigue and hope. "We've got this." The cabin she had rented near Cedar Hollow was a modest, single-room structure with peeling siding and an iron stove that belched more smoke than heat. She had chosen it precisely because it was cheap and out of the way, a place where she could vanish if she wanted to. Tonight, though, it took on a new role, a potential refuge for these dogs. If she acted fast enough, she flung open the door and carried the mother dog inside, placing her on a tattered blanket in the corner. The pups let out pitiful cries, squirming blindly. Emily's heart twisted. "You're safe now," she promised, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. A quick examination revealed the mother dog had a ragged wound on her flank, possibly from scraping against rocks or branches, and her paw pads were cracked and bloody. The pups didn't look any better off. Tiny, malnourished, trembling with chill. Emily rushed to her truck, retrieving a half-empty water jug. She poured a small amount into a bowl she found under the sink. The mother dog sniffed once, then drank greedily. Emily let out a breath. At least you're thirsty. That's a good sign. But her adrenaline was spiked. She could see that the mother dog needed more help than Emily could give alone. She recalled passing a sign on the outskirts of Cedar Hollow for an animal clinic. That was the only place she knew of within any reasonable distance. She grabbed her keys again. "I'm not going to let you die," she told the dog. "Neither of you. You hear me?" A shaky whimper was all the response she got. The trip to Cedar Hollow Animal Clinic was mercifully short. Flickering streetlights guided her down a quiet main road. The clinic's neon sign buzzed softly in the darkness. Open 24/7, Emily exhaled in relief. She carried the mother dog inside, the pups bundled against her chest, and was immediately greeted by a petite, middle-aged woman in scrubs. "I'm Dr. Marla Green," she said, her expression shifting from neutral politeness to alarm when she saw the dog's condition. "Oh dear, let's get them in the exam room." Dr. Green worked swiftly, checking the mother dog's vitals, ears, gums, limbs. She weighed the pups, tested their reflexes, noting they were extremely underweight. Emily hovered nearby, feeling helpless and out of her depth. "I found them in the woods," she said quietly. "I couldn't just leave them. I think the mom's been out there for a while. And the pups were born recently." Dr. Green nodded grimly. "Likely so. If you hadn't brought them in, they might not have lasted the night." She administered a vitamin shot to the mother dog, who flinched but otherwise remained still. "She's severely malnourished. We need to keep a close eye on her milk production for these pups." Emily's throat tightened. The veterinarian's matter-of-fact tone struck a chord. She was used to hearing that same no-nonsense voice from combat medics, who had tended to her unit's wounded. It reminded her of that time after an ambush, when Daniel had been scraped by shrapnel. They'd told her he'd be fine. Just stitches. That memory felt like a dull knife in her heart. She pushed the thought away and forced herself to listen. As Dr. Green continued, "They'll need round-the-clock feeding. Possible supplementation with puppy formula if the mother can't produce enough milk. Are you willing to take that on?" The question gave Emily pause. She had no stable living arrangement beyond her tiny rental cabin. No job. No future prospects. Yet the thought of leaving these dogs to fend for themselves, or to be euthanized if they deteriorated, made her stomach churn. "I'll do it," she replied, voice trembling with conviction. Dr. Green offered a warm smile. "That's what I hoped to hear. Let's get you set up with supplies, and I'll show you how to bottle feed if it comes to that." Before long, Emily was loading cans of high-protein dog food, a tub of puppy formula, syringes, and a battered instruction pamphlet into the truck's back seat. The mother dog lay curled on an old blanket, exhaustion etched into every line of her lean frame, while the pups nestled against her. Emily realized she'd unconsciously started calling the dog Sable in her head. Thinking of that dark, sable-like fur that clung to her frame, it felt right somehow, like naming was the first step to forging a deeper bond. They drove back to the cabin in near silence, the moon casting pale ribbons of light across the deserted road. Emily's mind flickered over the day's events. The haunting discovery of the stone hand in the woods, the battered shepherd, the pup's pitiful cries. A bizarre notion struck her. Perhaps these fragile creatures had saved her as much as she'd saved them. If not for them, would she have kept wandering, searching for something intangible, waiting for Daniel's voice to fade from her memories? She clenched the steering wheel tighter. "Not tonight," she murmured to herself. "Tonight, I have a purpose." Once inside the cabin, she arranged a makeshift bed from old towels and cardboard, placing it in a draft-free corner near the wood-burning stove. The mother dog sniffed the area, then collapsed with a quiet groan, pups scrabbling for position against her belly. Emily watched, her heart swelling with an emotion she could only describe as protectiveness. War had honed her instincts to defend her own, but she had never expected to use that instinct for something so simple as a family of lost dogs. Hours slipped by. She dozed off in a chair, jerking awake whenever the puppies whined. Each time,
She'd shuffle over, check their bellies, make sure they were latching on or that Sable was still breathing steadily. When the mother dog's breathing became shallow, Emily recalled Doc Green's instructions and carefully introduced a little formula to one pup who seemed unable to nurse. It was a clumsy effort, her hands shaking, the pup squeaking in protest. But after a few drops dribbled onto its tongue, the tiny creature settled into a more rhythmic suck. Emily exhaled with relief, feeling uncharacteristically proud of this small triumph. As dawn's early light seeped through the cracked cabin window, Emily found herself sitting on the floor, back against the wall, the mother dog's head resting on her thigh. The pups were piled in a furry heap, their soft snores filling the silence. Emily was bone-tired, yet beneath her exhaustion lay a peculiar calm. For once her mind wasn't consumed by the memories of Daniel's final moment. Instead, she was thinking about whether she should rename the pups or how she might build a better sleeping area for them. It was a revelation. Caring for these animals gave her a tangible sense of purpose she hadn't felt in ages. That morning she decided to give each puppy a name. She peered at the littlest one, whose fur had a faint reddish tinge. Maple, she said, stroking the pup's head gently. Next was the restless one, scrabbling over its siblings. Your Scout, she whispered with a smile, thinking of all the scouts she had known in the army, sharp-eyed and ever on the move. The pudgy, slow-moving pup immediately reminded her of a big, gentle bear she once saw in a wildlife magazine. You'll be Bear, she announced, voice still husky with sleep. And finally the one that insisted on chewing her pant leg whenever she got too close. Willow, she said, amused at its stubborn nature. Yet the mother dog, she realized, already had a name in her heart. Sable, Emily told her softly, scratching behind the shepherd's ear. Just like that statue's dark stone. It felt like an odd link, naming this dog after the mind-bending monolith in the forest. But perhaps it was fitting. That strange, ancient hand had been the catalyst for all of this, for her stumbling upon these animals, for a flicker of hope she didn't know she still possessed. Eventually she rose on stiff legs and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The cabin stoop gave her a limited view of the forest, where pale sunlight filtered through branches, illuminating drifting motes of dust. She pulled in a breath, letting the scent of pine and damp earth ground her. And then, inevitably, her thoughts returned to the stone hand. In the daylight she wondered if she had exaggerated its scale in her mind. But no, her memory was disturbingly clear. It really had been as large as she recalled, its carved grooves forming swirling patterns that reminded her of old cryptic symbols she'd seen in museum exhibits. A shudder coursed through her. She saw again the faint glow in her mind's eye, felt the momentary warmth that had pulsed through her fingertips. What are you? She muttered under her breath, as though the stone could hear her from miles away. She couldn't shake the feeling that the hand was more than just rock. Whether it was a piece of an undiscovered sculpture or something else entirely, she felt drawn to it. The memory of how it felt, like living stone charged with silent energy, lingered far too vividly. That day, Emily spent long hours tending to Sable and her pups, checking the mother dog's wound, cleaning away dried blood. At intervals she practiced mixing the puppy formula, ensuring the temperature was right. She fed Bear a few drops when he struggled to latch, then patted Maple's tiny back until a delicate burp escaped. In these menial nurturing tasks, she found a soothing routine, a way to anchor herself in the present. She recalled the advice of the medics in her unit: focus on the immediate steps, keep the patient stable, never lose sight of the objective. Here, her objective was simple: keep them alive. Night arrived too quickly. Emily couldn't bring herself to sleep. Images of that stone hand drifted through her thought, merging with the swirling flashbacks of desert sand and mortar fire. She'd catch herself dozing, only to wake with a jolt at the phantom sound of an explosion. The second time it happened, she realized she was on her feet, heart pounding, scanning for threats. But the only sound was the whimper of puppies wanting attention. She sank back into the chair, pressing a hand to her sweat-drenched forehead. Get it together, she muttered, feeling a surge of frustration at how tightly the war's ghost still gripped her. After calming the puppies, she forced herself to open a worn notebook, one that had survived tours overseas and endless nights of restless scribbling.
She tried to sketch the stone hand with the same details she remembered from the forest. Each massive finger, the intricate whorls etched around the knuckles, the vines crawling up its sides. Her pencil scratched the page feverishly, but she struggled to capture that haunting presence. The lines looked crude, static, frustrated. She flipped the page and tried again, letting the memory guide her. A faint voice inside her said, "It's not just a statue. You felt it. It recognized you." She set the pencil down, swallowing hard. That was madness, right? A statue couldn't recognize anyone. She chalked it up to her fragile mental state, still reeling from Daniel's death. Still, the compulsion to understand that carved hand refused to let her go. She turned her attention back to Sable, who was awake but lying quietly, those intense shepherd eyes tracking Emily's every movement. "Who were you running from out there?" Emily murmured. "Or did someone just dump you?" The shepherd made a soft noise, as though empathizing with Emily's confusion. "Well," Emily said, "seems we're both strays of a kind." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows. Emily felt a pang of loneliness, but also a flicker of something that might be hope. This place, these dogs, that stone hand, it was all part of a tapestry she didn't yet understand. But for the first time since Daniel's death, she felt a spark of purpose. She would care for these animals, keep them alive, and somehow, between feeding intervals and warm compresses, she might work up the courage to go back into those woods. Something out there was calling her, a silent beckoning, a note that rang in her chest whenever she thought about the swirling symbols on the stone. She closed her notebook and placed it on a small table near the window. The pups were asleep again, their bellies full, their tiny bodies piled like soft, fuzzy stones. Sable lifted her head, letting out a sigh. Emily knelt, stroking the mother dog's muzzle gently. "I can't promise everything will be all right," she whispered, "but I can promise I won't leave you." The vow felt monumental, as though she were pledging to a larger force than just one scrawny dog family. In a way, she was also promising Daniel, promising herself that she wouldn't run any longer. If there was a chance to save a life, if there was a chance to face the unknown, she would take it. Night settled into a peaceful hush, the crackle of the wood stove the only sound competing with the pups' tiny snores. Emily eventually allowed her eyes to close, letting exhaustion claim her. She dreamed of nothingness at first, just a calm void. But as dawn neared, she drifted into a scene of tall trees and rolling mist. The stone hand emerged from the earth, the vines shifting as though they were alive. Standing beside it, Daniel smiled at her, raising one hand in quiet greeting. Then his form faded, leaving only the statue's massive fingers curved toward the sky. When morning broke, Emily woke with the faint trace of tears on her cheeks. She didn't remember the exact details of the dream, only that she wasn't alone in it. She sniffed, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Across the room, Sable looked up, tail giving a soft thump against the floor. The pups stirred, squeaking for breakfast. Emily rose, stretching out the kinks in her neck, and set about the tasks of morning. Fresh water, formula if needed, checking the mother dog's injuries. Each little success, every pup that drank, every sign that Sable's wound was healing, fed an inner determination she hadn't felt in months. Outside, the Appalachian morning glowed. She found herself standing on the threshold, breathing the crisp air and whispering words into the wind. "I'll go back there," she told the forest. "I'll figure out what that hand is and why it feels so alive." She half expected an echo, but heard only the rustle of leaves. Still, she found comfort in the unspoken pact she'd made. The next time she ventured into Old Whispering Hollow, she would be prepared. She'd gather more information, gather her courage, maybe even gather supplies for a longer stay. Because if that mysterious monolithic carving had anything to do with the sense of overwhelming pull she felt, she owed it to herself and to Daniel's memory to uncover the truth. For now, though, her duty was here, in this tiny cabin that smelled of wet fur and boiled puppy formula. She turned back inside, where Sable stared at her with trusting eyes and the pups squirmed helplessly, ready to greet another day with fragile optimism. Emily couldn't help but feel the barest smile curl her lip. "We're all survivors here," she thought. Maybe that's enough of a reason to keep going. And for the first time in a long while, it was. Emily Walker had spent the past few nights wide awake, mind replaying the unsettling warmth she'd felt when she touched that giant stone hand. A part of her still questioned whether it had been a delusion, a trick of fatigue coupled with her war-weary psyche. Another part of her, the deeper instinct forged in combat, insisted that she go back and see for herself. And so, on a cool, foggy morning, she left Sable and the pups in Marla Green's capable hands at the Cedar Hollow Animal Clinic. Emily felt a pang of guilt as she watched the German Shepherd glance at her with anxious eyes. But Marla's reassurance had been firm. "Go on. Emily will keep them safe. You have something you need to finish out there." She drove to Old Whispering Hollow Trail alone, her truck's worn tires crunching over damp gravel. The early sun struggled to pierce the thick morning mist that crept between the trees. Shadows writhed along the forest floor, and Emily couldn't help but feel she was stepping into another realm, one that cared nothing for the logic of roads and modern life. She carried only a small pack containing a sketchbook, charcoal pencils, a hunting knife, and some basic first aid supply. The haunting sense of anticipation grew heavier with each step away from the truck, as if the forest was watching her. The hush in the woods deepened. Even the crows, so vocal during her last visit, seemed subdued. A soft wind hissed through the branches, carrying the faint tang of wet earth. She made her way toward the place she remembered, guided by a mental map etched in her mind. From that day she stumbled across the starving shepherd. The slope dipped slightly, leading her into a darker hollow where moss-draped logs lay half-buried in undergrowth. Her footsteps slowed when she recognized the cluster of boulders near the fallen tree where she'd found the dog family. Everything felt simultaneously familiar and alien, as if the forest had shifted shape to conceal its secrets. Eventually she caught sight of it, that massive stone hand extending from the ground, half swallowed by time and tangled vine. Emily drew closer, the hair on her arms prickling in eerie recognition. Through the swirling haze, she saw the damp rags of moss clinging to each gargantuan finger, and that faint pattern of swirling lines chiseled into the knuckle. She paused a few feet away, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Slowly, she slipped on a pair of thin work gloves. Memories of that uncanny warmth pulsed in her mind. She wasn't entirely sure she wanted to feel it again unmediated. With careful, deliberate movements, she began peeling away layers of green and brown decay from the top of the hand. Chunks of damp moss plopped onto the ground, revealing more of the carved stone beneath. The light was still dim, but enough seeped through the canopy for her to see what lay hidden: spirals and angular lines that appeared to be some sort of symbolic script. She frowned, leaning in for a closer look. Her heart fluttered when she recognized shapes that reminded her of old military symbols. Cartographic lines used for marking elevations or territory boundaries. One swirl looked suspiciously like the topographical depiction of ridges on a map. Another shape resembled the stylized crest her old unit used. A thought that made her stomach clench. What in the world were those doing here? Melded with older, possibly indigenous carvings showing wolves, eagles, and coiled serpents. She brushed away more clumps, revealing the partial silhouette of what might be a sun or a star. "This is impossible," she muttered under her breath. No one had told her about any collaborative art piece between the military and local Cherokee or Appalachian tribes, and certainly nothing that would be lost out in the middle of the woods. She paused to flip open her sketchbook, hastily drawing each line, each symbol, determined to preserve a record in case the stone eroded further. As she traced the forms onto paper, a chill trickled down her spine. The design seemed to fuse two worlds, one from her nightmares, the other from ancient stories older than any war she'd ever fought. When she thought she'd captured every detail she could, Emily set her sketchbook aside and crouched by the base of the hand. The ground was soft, and she could see how easily the forest might reclaim something like this with each passing year. A voice in her mind whispered about the dog and pups that had sheltered here, as though the statue had offered them some form of silent protection. Tentatively, she placed a gloved palm against the stone. The contact was colder this time. Maybe the gloves prevented that odd heat from flooding her senses. Without entirely knowing why, she pulled the glove off. As her bare fingers touched the carved surface, she stiffened. First came a chill, as one would expect from stone in a cool forest. But then, sure enough, a slow, throbbing warmth seeped into her hand. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. The warmth spread through her arm, up to her shoulder, and then it was as if the forest went deathly quiet. A hallucination?
A fantasy conjured by a traumatized mind? She wanted to jerk away, but something held her there. A compulsion she couldn't explain. Her eyes snapped shut as a flash of memory tore through her. Daniel standing in full uniform, smiling at her the night before they deployed. She felt his warmth, the press of his forehead against hers, and heard him whisper, "We'll see this through, together." The image blurred into a swirl of blood and dust, a battlefield steeped in sun-scorched devastation. Then it shifted at Daniel's face, impossibly there within the swirling engravings on the stone, mouthing words she couldn't quite hear, until a single phrase echoed in her mind, "Don't let it slip away. Finish it for all of us." With a choked gasp, Emily pulled her hand back, stumbling so that she almost lost her balance. She braced herself against a nearby stump, breathing hard. The forest resumed its murmur of rustling leaves, as if it had been holding its breath alongside her. A line of sweat trickled down her temple. She glanced around, half expecting to see Daniel's silhouette leaning against a tree, but there was only the silent expanse of trunks and vine-laden branches. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. She let out a shaky laugh. "I'm losing it," she whispered. Yet, deep down she knew she'd felt something. The memory of Daniel, or the echo of him, was too vivid to be mere invention. And if this bizarre stone monolith could trigger such a vision, she couldn't ignore it. She would. Her entire life since the war had been about avoidance, dodging the memories, the guilt, and the unresolved sorrow. Now, facing this intangible mystery, she sensed a chance at confrontation. Perhaps the only way to move forward was to dig into whatever secrets this ancient statue held. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on her jeans. She pulled the sketchbook closer and, flipping to a fresh page, painstakingly redrew every symbol she'd uncovered on the stone. She even made note of the approximate location of each swirl or line, labeling them with numbers so she could reference them later. If there was a pattern or code here, whether it was historical, mythical, or even something else, she was determined to crack it. Closing the sketchbook, she nodded to herself as if sealing a vow. "All right," she breathed. "If this is the last shot I have at making sense of anything, I'm taking it." She slid her things back into her pack, her gaze lingering on the giant hand one last time. It loomed there, silent and inscrutable, but she thought she could almost sense an air of acknowledgement, like the statue recognized her presence. By the time she trekked back to her truck, the forest felt both ominous and strangely comforting. She drove off with a set jaw and a plan forming in her mind. She would visit the local ranger station. If there were records, or anyone in the area who knew old Cherokee legends, maybe she could piece together the significance of the stone sentinel. She refused to let fear or doubt muzzle her curiosity. For the first time in a long time, she felt a spark that wasn't purely survival instinct. It felt like purpose. The next day found Emily turning onto a gravel road that led to the Cedar Hollow Ranger Station. The small building perched on a rocky rise, overlooking a lush valley. A battered wooden sign welcomed visitors to the ranger station, and she spotted a single green truck parked out front. Inside, the smell of old paper, coffee, and the faint musk of well-worn uniforms filled the air. A tall woman with short, sandy brown hair stood behind a desk, piled high with maps and brochures. "Good morning. Can I help you?" the ranger asked, her tone polite yet direct. Emily sized her up, an air of competence about her, the kind that came from long days patrolling these woods. "I'm looking for Ranger Claire Hensley," Emily said, clearing her throat. "I heard she knows these parts better than anyone." The woman lifted an eyebrow. "That'd be me, Claire Hensley. And you are?" "Emily Walker." Emily fidgeted slightly with the strap of her backpack. I came across something in Old Whispering Hollow. A stone hand. It looks old, possibly part of a bigger statue. I was hoping you might know something about it." For a moment, Claire's face remained impassive. She then stepped around the desk, crossing her arms. A stone hand. Her expression betrayed neither belief nor doubt, but more like a patient curiosity. "Not many folks wander off trail there, especially if they're new in town. I'm renting a place near Cedar Hollow," Emily replied, a slight defensive note creeping into her voice. "I served in the army, been traveling a bit. I ended up here by chance, but that statue, I can't stop thinking about it." Claire took in Emily's posture, shoulders squared, eyes flicking around the small office. Perhaps the hallmark of someone used to scanning for threat. "Let's see what you've got," she said at last, motioning for Emily to follow her to a wide counter used for examining maps. Emily pulled out her sketchbook, flipping to the pages where she'd meticulously copied the swirling lines, the spliced military-like markings, and the tribal motif. As Emily turned each page, Claire's breath caught almost imperceptibly. She reached out, tracing a finger over the shapes of wolves and eagles. "These are like some of the old Cherokee stories," she murmured. "They speak of a great guardian who once stood watch over the mountain to protect the people from floods and disasters. But the military symbols? That's a new one." Emily suppressed a shiver of excitement. "So you do recognize something?" Claire nodded slowly, her brow furrowed. "I grew up hearing tales from my dad about a stone sentinel. Some folks called it the mountain's guardian, or a giant that turned to stone after saving the land. Most dismissed it as legend. But your drawings remind me of patterns I've seen in sketches kept by local families, especially the ones with Cherokee heritage." Emily exhaled in relief. She wasn't imagining things. Someone else had heard of this stone sentinel. "So the story is it was once a giant. I read some references to a possible massive statue, but nothing concrete. Maybe it's older than any written record." Claire let out a sigh, propping her hands on her hips. "Possibly. Or maybe it's from an older generation that tried to shape a local myth into something physical, like carving a statue out in the forest." She paused, narrowing her gaze. "You said you found a giant stone hand. Where exactly?" Emily described the location, the path she took, how she discovered Sable and the puppies near the same spot. When she finished, Claire moved to a file cabinet against the wall. She rummaged through some manila folders, eventually producing one that looked quite old. "Back in 1987, there was a flash flood in that part of the forest. A group of local hunters got caught in it. They swore they saw a huge carved hand, half buried under debris." She placed the folder on the counter. The typed report was yellowed, corners curved. Emily leaned over, scanning the lines. One of the hunters claimed they saw fingers as big as a man's thigh, jutting from the ground. Another said the stone felt warm, like it had a heartbeat. The group tried to return the next day, but the site had been submerged in mud and debris. Further down it noted that one member of the hunting party never returned. His body was never found. The area was deemed unstable after the flood, so officials restricted access. Emily shivered. "He vanished?" Claire shrugged, eyes flicking to the old report. The official stance was he drowned. His remains were just never recovered. But the men who survived insisted something about that hand was off. Emily touched the paper gently, heart pounding. "These symbols I found, the heat I felt, that lines up with what they described decades ago." Claire closed the folder, pinching the bridge of her nose. "It's been 30 years, and no one has mentioned it since. Most folks around Cedar Hollow see that old story as a cautionary tale. Don't go wandering off where the floods can get you." She fixed Emily with a considering stare. "But you're the first person to show up with sketches that look an awful lot like the old stories." Feeling a swirl of both trepidation and excitement, Emily decided to push her luck. "I want to find out more, like if there's any record of a statue built in the area, or if maybe it's something truly ancient. Do you know anyone else who might have been involved back then? Someone with direct knowledge of the search parties or archives?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "There's a retired ranger, Liam Blackwood. He was around during the 1987 incident, took part in the search. These days he's living in a rundown cabin deeper in the Appalachian foothills. He doesn't come into town much, bit of a recluse, and not exactly friendly." "That's okay," Emily said, swallowing the anxiety that crept in. "If he's the one who might have seen it firsthand, I need to talk to him." "Fair warning," Claire said, scribbling an address on a slip of paper. "He's suspicious of strangers, especially anyone asking about old cases. But if you're serious, show him your drawings. Tell him I sent you." Emily took the piece of paper, pressing it carefully into her sketchbook. Relief and curiosity warred within her, but for the first time she felt a clear direction. "Thank you, Ranger Hensley. This means a lot, and I promise I'll be careful out there." Claire watched her gather her things, a pensive look crossing her face. "I'll be honest, I'm not sure if I want to see this stone sentinel proven real. Part of me liked it better as a ghost story." She trailed off, then shook her head. "But if that statue does exist, it might be a piece of history no one's ever documented. Just don't go alone if you head back into those hollows." Emily dipped her head. "I appreciate the concern. I'm not quite alone. I have a friend who can watch my back." She thought of Sable, though the shepherd was in no condition to trek the wilderness. Possibly Earl or someone else in town might help. For now, though her mission was clear: find Liam Blackwood. She thanked Claire again and left the station, the old folder's words echoing in her mind. "Warm, like it had a heartbeat. Outside, the sun shone bright, illuminating the vibrant gold of the leaves that framed the valley. Cedar Hollow's main street lay below, a quiet strip of old storefronts and a diner that smelled of coffee and bacon grease. Emily breathed in the crisp air. She felt as though she stood on the threshold of two worlds, the everyday life of a sleepy mountain town and the hidden labyrinth of legend and personal ghosts that beckoned her deeper into the wild.
The path forward seemed daunting, but she also sensed it was necessary for Daniel, for herself. Armed with Claire's directions, Emily left early the next morning to find Liam Blackwood. She wound her way along dirt roads that snaked through thick forests, the morning light glinting off dew-laden spiderwebs. Every so often, a wooden sign or a rusted mailbox indicated the presence of some isolated homestead, but most times it was just her and the hush of the mountain. Eventually, she reached what might generously be called a driveway, two rutted tracks leading into a stand of venerable oaks. The canopy overhead filtered sunlight into shifting patterns of gold and green. She parked in front of a small cabin whose paint had long ago surrendered to the elements. Leaning precariously near the porch was an old rocking chair, one leg missing so that it tilted at an unsettling angle. Smoke curled from a narrow metal chimney. Emily approached slowly, stepping over an abandoned tire, a pile of firewood, and a bucket filled with who knew what. Before she could knock, the door creaked open. A man stood there, stooped with age yet still imposing in a wiry sort of way. His face was lined with deep wrinkles, his hair a wild tangle of gray. He held a shotgun at his side, not pointing it exactly but clearly making no secret of it either. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice gravelly. "Emily Walker," she answered evenly, raising both hands in a non-threatening gesture. Ranger Claire Hensley suggested, "I talked to you about something I found in the woods." Liam's gaze flicked over her truck, her stand, the slight bulge of a knife at her belt. "I don't talk to reporters, government types, or idiots," he grunted. "Which one are you?" Emily fought the urge to roll her eyes. "None of the above, I hope. I'm a veteran. Just passing through, I found a giant stone hand in Old Whispering Hollow." Claire said, "You might know something about it from night." Something in his eyes changed, a muscle working in his jaw. "That's so." He lowered the shotgun a fraction, but didn't step aside. "How'd you know about that year?" Emily took a cautious step forward, pulling her sketchbook from her backpack. She opened it to reveal her drawings of the stone sentinel's symbols. "Because I read an old file at the ranger station, and I saw it myself. These carvings, the shape of the hand. I wanted to ask you if you recognized any of it." Liam stared in silence, his breath coming in slow, ragged pull. Then he turned abruptly. "Get in," he said, "but keep your hands where I can see them." The cabin interior was dim, smelled of damp wood and old coffee. A single window let in a narrow strip of light, illuminating dust motes that hovered in the stale air. Liam laid the shotgun across a rickety table, then dropped into a chair. He motioned for Emily to do the same on an overturned crate. With a shaky sigh, she complied. After an uncomfortably long silence, Liam nodded at the sketchbook. "Show me," Emily flipped through the pages, explaining how she discovered the dog family, the battered mother shepherd, and then the stone hand. She detailed the swirl motifs, the odd lines reminiscent of military cartography. While she spoke, Liam's eyes never left the sketch. By the time she finished, his face was drawn tight. "I was there," he said, finally, voice barely above a whisper. "During the flood of '87, we lost one of our men, Joe Sturgis." The name trembled on his lips, as though conjuring a ghost. "Found this clearing where the soil had washed away, revealing a stone hand so big I thought I was dreaming. When I touched it," he trailed off, swallowing. "Damn thing felt alive, warm, like a heartbeat under the rock." Emily's pulse quickened. "I felt something similar, thought I was crazy." Liam let out a humorless chuckle. "Maybe we both are. I tried telling folks about it. Nobody believed me. The official story was that the place got buried in mud after the flood. Some started rumors that Joe died because of his own foolishness, or that I'd made up tall tales to cover it. But that hand was real. By the time we got a search party back in there, though, it was gone, or hidden, like the ground swallowed it." He pushed himself to his feet, wobbling slightly, opening an old trunk at the edge of the room. He rummaged around until he produced a battered folder and a rolled-up piece of paper. Returning to the table, he unrolled the paper, a sketch so old the edges were yellow. The pencil lines faint. Emily leaned forward. The layout was eerily similar to her own drawing. A massive hand with swirling engravings, partial shapes of animals, and something that resembled a stylized soldier's insignia along one knuckle. See here? Liam jabbed a finger at a symbol that looked like a shield overlapped by twisting lines. That's what we saw. I tried to note every detail. Then it vanished, and people called me a liar, or crazy. Never did get closure. Emily's breath caught as she flipped the edges of the paper, comparing it to the fresh sketches in her own book. They were practically a mess. Her lines crisper due to the statue being less covered by debris this time, but the motifs were unmistakable. It's all here, she whispered, excitement flickering. You weren't imagining it. Liam exhaled a mixture of relief and lingering bitterness. Well, you're the first person to see it after me. Means the thing is definitely out there again. Or still. He locked eyes with Emily. You said you felt something like it was calling you. She hesitated. Yes. And I saw a vision of someone important to me. Someone who died. It was like the stone triggered a memory or Liam rested a shaky hand against the table. Same as me. I saw Joe. It was as if the statue was showing me what I lost, or what I needed to remember. I tried ignoring it all these years, but it doesn't leave you. Silence stretched as both of them stared at the old sketch. Outside, a woodpecker hammered at a tree, the rhythm echoing in the hush of the cabin. Finally, Liam rolled up the paper and handed it over. Take it. I'm too old to go chasing after ghosts. If you're set on unraveling this, maybe you can figure out what it all means. Emily swallowed hard, carefully accepting the fragile page. Thank you. Honestly, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing, but I do know I have to keep trying. Liam regarded her with a weary look. Don't let it consume you. The way it almost did me. That hand, that stone sentinel. It's bigger than I. If you dig too deep, it might drag you under. She met his gaze. So be it. I have people I've lost too. Feels like they're tied to this somehow, or at least the guilt I carry. Maybe if I figure it out, I can find a little peace. He nodded in resigned understanding. Ain't we all looking for that? Gathering his breath, he stood and walked her to the door. Shotgun once again in hand, but no longer brandished. Claire Hensley is a good ranger. She'll help if you need it. The rest is on you. Emily stepped out onto the sagging porch. Before descending the steps, she turned back. Liam, I appreciate you talking to me. For what it's worth, I believe you. And I'm sorry about your friend. A fleeting softness crossed his features. Be careful out there, he murmured, then shut the door, leaving Emily alone on the creaking porch in the hush of the Appalachian foothill. She lingered a moment. The battered sketch rolled in her hand, then made her way back to her truck. As the engine rumbled to life, her mind swirled with conflicting emotions. A surge of triumph that she wasn't alone in this discovery, overshadowed by an undercurrent of dread. This stone sentinel, whatever it was, had a pull that went beyond mere curiosity. It had claimed at least one life, haunted those who witnessed it, and triggered visions of the departed. What does it want from me? Yet as she navigated the winding roads away from Liam Blackwood's remote cabin, she sensed the stirrings of something she hadn't felt in a long time. A resolute determination. She wasn't running this time. If the stone sentinel was truly connected to her memories of Daniel, she would follow that connection wherever it led, no matter how frightening. Because for the first time since the war, she felt like her life had a direction again. In the side mirror, the cabin faded behind the tree. Emily clutched the old sketch in her lap, heart pounding with each bump in the road. Stone sentinel, I'm coming back. The vow echoed in her mind as she aimed the truck towards Cedar Hollow. A new mission quietly unfolding in her thought. This time, she told herself, she wouldn't face the unknown unprepared. And maybe, just maybe, she could finally lay Daniel's memory to rest in the process. In the days following her conversation with Liam Blackwood, Emily Walker found a strange sense of steadiness she hadn't experienced in years. Each morning she awoke at first light in her humble cabin, near Cedar Hollow, greeted by the soft whimpers of Bear, Willow, Maple and Scout. Sable, the mother shepherd, would lift her head from the nest of blankets, ears perking at Emily's every move. The dog's wounds were healing steadily now, thanks to regular checkups with Marla Green. While the pups scrabbled around for breakfast, Emily meticulously checked their paws,
ears and bellies for any sign of trouble. It was not lost on her how bizarrely domestic it all felt. Only weeks ago she had been drifting aimlessly, haunted by war-torn memories and Daniel's death. Now, she found herself measuring formula, cleaning up puppy messes, and making sure Sable ate enough to maintain her milk supply. The routine was surprisingly comforting. Scout would always tumble out of the blanket pile first, bounding toward Emily with toothless enthusiasm. Willow, more mischievous, preferred nibbling at Emily's shoelaces. Maple was the quiet observer, often curling into the curve of Emily's arm whenever she settled down on the floor. And Bear, rounder and slower than his siblings, was happiest when dozing by Sable's flank, content to let everyone else vie for attention. Perhaps the most surprising part was Emily's growing habit of talking to Sable. Late at night or before dawn, when the world was still, she would speak in a low, hushed tone about things she never could voice before. She talked about Daniel, about the final mission that took him from her, about her unit, and how every lost friend left a permanent scar. Sable would listen with solemn canine eyes, as though she understood the weight of Emily's words. Sometimes the shepherd pressed her muzzle against Emily's arm, a small gesture that made Emily feel, for once, less alone. She began to realize that rescuing these dogs was rescuing something in herself. For all the nightmares that still plagued her, for all the tension that lingered in her bones, Emily finally had a concrete reason to wake up and fight through another day. The tasks of feeding and caring for Sable and the pups kept her tethered to the present, preventing her from slipping too deep into the echoes of combat. Each night, when she heard the pups' soft snores, she felt something close to peace, the first hints of a family she thought she would never have. Yet there was more to her current life than tending to the canine family. During the day, Emily threw herself into another mission, searching for the hidden pieces of what Liam had called the Stone Sentinel. Armed with her notebook of sketches, the partial map gleaned from Liam's old drawings, and a battered survival knife, she roamed the forests and ridges around Cedar Hollow, determined to uncover any fragments of that mysterious statue. She pinned copies of old topographical maps to the cabin wall, cross-referencing them with the swirling shapes she'd seen on the Guardian's hand. Some lines on the stone reminded her of ridgelines, and certain outcroppings, places where the terrain might hide more carved stone. She made note of geological anomalies or places where the earth had shifted, possibly exposing fragments. Early each morning, after feeding the pups, Emily drove her truck to a chosen trailhead, clad in hiking boots, cargo pants, and a worn flannel jacket. She ventured into the woodland, scanning for signs of exposed rock or unusual formations. Her eyes were sharper now, trained by her military background. She had a knack for reading terrain, broken patches of soil, clumps of ferns disturbed in odd patterns. Even subtle changes in the lay of fallen branches could hint at something buried below. Each time she discovered carved lines, she'd carefully sketch them, labeling coordinates. Most turned out to be nature's own artistry, or stray remnants of old fence posts. Yet every so often, she encountered cryptic markings reminiscent of the swirling motifs on the Guardian's hand. She felt the silent presence of the mountains as she wandered. Sometimes she caught glimpses of faint rock etchings that seemed older than any colonial settlement, older even than many known native inscriptions. If not for Liam's recollection and her own encounter with the giant stone hand, she might have dismissed them as random cracks. But now, each suspicious engraving stoked the sense that she was unraveling a hidden tapestry. The deeper she went, the more convinced she became that these mountains held stories far older than her pain and far more significant than the brief tragedies of modern life. After several fruitless excursions, a promising lead from Ranger Claire led Emily to Blackwater Creek, a winding waterway notorious for dangerous flash floods. In 1987, as she'd heard, a deluge had sculpted the land anew, ripping away soil and toppling trees. If any large fragment of the Guardian had been dislodged, this was the place to find it. She trekked along the rocky banks, the creek's flow reduced to a steady trickle in late autumn. Towering pines and oaks lined the water's edge, their roots tangled in mossy boulder. Every so often, she stooped to examine a protruding rock or run her hand over grooves that might be natural erosion, or maybe something else entirely. And then, near a bend in the creek where the water cascaded over a short drop, she spotted it, a massive wedge of stone half buried in gravel, slick with algae. Emily crouched, brushing away layers of silt and tiny pebbles. Her heart jumped when she revealed intricate swirls and the outlines of what looked like a wolf's head. The same type of swirling line, the same style of carving she'd seen on the guardian's hand. Carefully, she wiped away more debris. The stone piece was large, nearly the size of her truck's hood, and it bore interlocked motifs of predators and raptors, a wolf's snout, an eagle's wing, all within those mesmerizing spiral patterns. She gingerly placed her palm on. At first the rock was cold and damp, but then she felt that faint pulsing warmth. Her breath caught in her throat as the stone seemed to hum against her skin like a living thing with a heartbeat. A surge of triumph flooded her. This wasn't just a random piece of carved rock. It had to be connected to the stone sentinel. She recorded the GPS coordinates in her notebook, took photos, and made a quick sketch, another puzzle piece that might eventually fit into the hole. The realization sent a thrill through her veins. She was on the right track. If the guardian truly existed in fragments scattered across the mountainous terrain, then every new piece brought her closer to understanding why this statue resonated so deeply with her own haunted memories. That evening, Emily returned to her cabin exhausted, but exhilarated. As soon as she opened the door, Sable sprang up from the blanket nest, tail wagging. The puppies scampered over, each yipping and greeting. The sense of welcome was almost overwhelming, a reminder that she'd not just found a new purpose, but also a small family to share her victories with. She set her pack down, knelt and let Willow gnaw playfully at her fingers. "You'll never guess what I discovered," she murmured. Glancing at Sable, it felt silly, talking to a dog about arcane stone fragment. Yet the shepherd gazed at her with keen interest, as though she sensed Emily's excitement. "I found another piece, a big one, and it felt alive, just like before." The dogs had no words to offer, of course, but their presence was enough. Emily ruffled Maple's fur and gently picked up Bear, pressing her cheek to his soft coat. A wave of gratitude coursed through her. "We're in this together," she whispered, recalling that strange warmth in the stone, the recollections of Daniel urging her onward. The soldier in her recognized the patterns as pieces of a larger operation, one that might bring closure and redemption. As she fed the pups and checked Sable's healing wounds, Emily's mind spun with possibility. She pictured the guardian assembled, an immense sentinel fused from fragments scattered across the Appalachian slopes. She pictured Daniel's face, the ache of longing tempered by the faint hope that all of this was leading somewhere bigger than her own. Over the soft panting of the dogs, she vowed to keep searching, convinced that the lines between her nightmares, the dog's salvation, and the stone sentinel were woven into a single fateful thread. A week later, after confirming with Marla that Sable and the pups were stable enough to be left with a neighbor for the day, Emily trekked out to a remote stretch of forest. She'd been following one of the faint streams that fed into Blackwater Creek, hoping to trace any further stone remnants upstream. The terrain was rugged, steep inclines, slippery rocks and dense undergrowth. Late in the afternoon, she stumbled upon what appeared to be a makeshift campsite, tucked between two leaning pines. Smoke curled lazily from a small fire, carrying the scent of boiling coffee. She froze, scanning the area for signs of who might be living so far off the beaten path. A moment later, an older man emerged from behind a battered tarp. He was lean to the point of gauntness, his beard unkempt, and his eyes startlingly bright, a sharp silver blue that reminded her of a wolf in moonlight. He lifted a hand in a cautious greeting. "Miss," he said in a raspy voice. Didn't expect company. Emily weighed her options. He could be dangerous, but she also felt a certain calm emanating from him. "I'm just exploring," she replied carefully. Didn't mean to intrude. His posture relaxed, and he nodded at the battered metal pot perched over the fire. "Coffee's on. Ain't much, but it's hot." His voice carried a hint of dryness, but no overt hostility. Something in his gaze told her he was lonely, maybe even glad for conversation. Weariness warred with curiosity in Emily's mind. Finally, she stepped closer. "I could use some coffee, thanks." He introduced himself as Earl Macaulay, once a coal miner in these mountains before a cave-in 10 years back cost him his livelihood, and eventually his family. His wife left, taking their child with her, and Earl had ended up in these woods with little more than a rucksack and a battered coffee pot. They sat on overturned logs near the fire. As the daylight shifted toward dusk, conversation unfolding in cautious increments. Earl admitted that he'd tried drifting to other places, nearby towns, halfway across the state, but something about these mountains always pulled him back. "I hear him sometimes," he muttered, staring into the flames. "The trees, the stones like they're alive. Or maybe it's just me losing my mind. A rueful smile twitched at his lips. Emily felt a shiver ripple through her. No, she said quietly. It might be real. I've seen things too, like a statue's hand that feels warm. At that, Earl's gaze snapped up, keen as a hawk's. Stone sentinel, he murmured. At least, that's what my granddaddy used to call it. Something about a giant that once guarded these parts. He trailed off, giving Emily a questioning look. You see it with your own eyes, she nodded. Pieces of it, anyway, and I'm trying to find more. I think it's scattered around. She paused, debating how much to reveal. Something about Earl's quiet intensity, though, made her trust him more than she expected. I feel like I owe it to someone. Earl nodded slowly. We all owe the mountains something, I reckon. That chance encounter led to a tenuous alliance. When Emily mentioned her systematic search for additional carved stones, Earl's eyes lit with an odd mix of hope and resignation. I know places folks avoid, he said. Gullies from old washouts. Ridges nobody hunts because the land's too rough might be where your missing stones ended up. Despite her initial weariness, Emily found herself agreeing to let Earl guide her. They spent the next days combing the terrain together. Earl showed her hidden deer trails and narrow passes through brambles thick enough to shred unprotected skin. Sometimes he stopped in mid-step, tilting his head as if listening for the mountain's heartbeat. Emily, remembering the faint warmth of the fragments, wondered if he really could sense something. They turned over fallen logs, pried away tangled roots, and scanned rocky ledges where the earth might have slid away. Whenever they spotted suspicious markings, lines or swirls on the stone, they paused, Emily pulling out her sketchbook to record each clue. She discovered that having Earl by her side allowed her to explore far deeper into the wilderness. He knew how to traverse muddy slopes without sliding to certain injury, how to read the direction of wind through the canopy, how to sense a change in weather an hour before it arrived. Bit by bit, their mutual caution slipped into genuine camaraderie. She told him about her life in the army, about Daniel, about how every living second after losing him felt borrowed. Earl responded with stories of the mine collapse, how the sound of twisting metal and rushing water still woke him in nightmares. Both recognized the hollow ache in each other's words, forging a fragile bond in the wild Appalachian hills. One crisp evening, they made camp near a shallow gorge, a day's trek from any road.
The night was quiet, except for the crackling of their small fire and the distant hoot of an owl. Emily stared at the flickering embers, her shoulders stiff from climbing. Eventually, she found herself talking, really talking about Daniel's final moments, about the guilt she carried for surviving. Earl listened, not interrupting, not pitying her. He simply took in every word. When she finished, a dampness in her eyes threatened to spill over. Earl poked the fire, sending sparks into the darkness. I wanted to die too, you know, he admitted softly. When the mine caved in, I lost some good friends in there. My wife left right after. Then the bank took the house. I tried leaving these mountains, but something always pulled me back. A feeling that maybe the land wasn't done with me yet. Emily looked at him, seeing not just a drifter, but a man clinging to hope in the only way he knew how. I get that, she whispered. Sometimes I think these mountains are the only place that doesn't judge me for being broken. Earl nodded. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, surprisingly, Emily felt a lightness, as if some of the burden had lifted. She allowed a small, cautious smile. So, we keep looking, right? For the rest of this stone sentinel, a spark of determination lit in Earl's eyes. Hell, yes, he said, returning her smile. If the mountain wants us to find it, we'll find it. Maybe we'll even figure out what it wants from us. They clinked their tin coffee mugs in a quiet toast, two lost souls forging ahead into a mystery that promised both danger and perhaps salvation. A few more grueling days of exploration passed before Earl suggested they speak with someone who might have deeper knowledge of local legend. Elder Ada Talltree, a Cherokee matriarch who lived near Blue Mountain. She's old enough to remember things people forgot, Earl said. Heard she's the last of her line in this area. If there's a story to be told about a giant stone guardian, she'll know it. Intrigued, Emily agreed. They traveled by truck to a small gravel lane branching off the main road that climbed toward Blue Mountain. The foliage thickened into a canopy of hickory and oak, leaves rustling with an almost melodic cadence. It was a place that felt ancient, a pocket of time sealed away from outside bustle. They arrived at a humble community center, a low wooden structure ringed by hand-carved totems depicting animals and natural spirits. A younger woman greeted them, her expression wary, until Earl mentioned they were seeking Elder Ada. With a measured nod, the woman beckoned them inside. They found Ada Talltree in a simple room, lined with woven baskets and intricate beadwork. Her posture regal despite her advanced age. She wore a hand-embroidered shawl and peered at them with eyes that held centuries of wisdom. Ada listened patiently as Emily haltingly described the carved fragments scattered throughout the forest, the giant stone hand, and the swirling motifs that hinted at a vast hidden statue. Earl added his own observations, mentioning the intangible pull he felt from the mountain. Throughout their account, Ada's expression remained impassive, but her gaze seemed to scrutinize every nuance of their words. When they finished, she gestured for them to sit on a pair of cushions near a low table. "You speak of the stone sentinel," she said, her voice low and resonant. "That is one name my ancestors gave to the spirit that dwells in these hills. Others called it the Appalachian giant or the guardian of the flood." Her gaze flicked to a wall hanging that depicted a colossal figure standing against a raging torrent. "They say he rose when the earth was young, to shield the land from a great calamity, a flood so powerful it might have wiped out every living soul in these mountains." Emily found herself holding her breath. Ada's words carried a measured gravity that made the story feel utterly real. Ada continued, "He served his purpose, and when the danger passed, laid down to rest, merging with the mountains he had saved. Over time, the forest, rock, and earth covered him. But the legends say if the mountains ever needed him again, or if a soul chosen by the land called him forth, the stone sentinel would awaken." Earl glanced at Emily, eyebrows raised. She swallowed. "We found pieces like his hand, maybe an arm or something else at Blackwater Creek. It's not just stone, it feels alive." Ada dipped her head in solemn acknowledgement. "Some believe the spirits of nature can anchor themselves to physical forms, which endure until awakened. The Cherokee elders rarely spoke of it in modern time. People no longer listened or they were afraid to disturb what lay hidden." Despite the warmth of the room, Emily felt a chill. So are we disturbing him? She wasn't sure if she was more terrified or hopeful at the prospect that the guardian might truly be more than just an artifact. The elder's eyes sparkled with an inscrutable light. "That depends on your intent, child. If the mountain has chosen you, it will show you all you need. But remember, the land never gives freely. Its gifts often come with a price." A pause hung in the air. Then Ada leaned closer, her ancient voice dropping to a near whisper. "You say your life has been marked by sorrow. The guardian's power can stir old wounds, conjure memories you've spent years running from. My question is, are you ready to pay that price?" Emily hesitated, images of Daniel's last moments flickering behind her eyes. Her chest felt tight, but she also recalled the surge of life she felt each time she touched one of the statue's fragments. "I don't have much left to lose," she admitted, a quiet tremor in her voice. "I can't turn away now. It's like I'm meant to see this through." Earl glanced at her, then nodded his agreement. "Same here. The mountain has a hold on me, and I can't break free. Maybe this is why." He met Ada's gaze, the lines in his face speaking of regret and perseverance. "We need to understand what we're part." A faint smile curved Ada's lips, though it was tinged with sadness. "So be it. In the old stories, the guardian's body was scattered when he fell into slumber. Some say by the force of storms, others say by time itself. Find the pieces and you may call him forth. But beware, waking ancient spirits is never done lightly." Her gaze shifted to Emily, as if perceiving the flicker of determination beneath her sorrow. "If you do succeed, you may heal not just yourselves, but also something in the land that has been broken a long time. Or you may unleash a power neither of you can contain." Her last words hung ominously in the still air, like a prophecy that demanded reverence. When they finally stepped out of the community center, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountain slope. Emily felt lighter than she had in ages, despite the gravity of Ada's warning. A sense of validation coursed through her. She wasn't just hallucinating or chasing illusions. The stone sentinel was real, anchored in centuries of myth, and it had chosen her path for reasons she couldn't fully grasp. Earl let out a soft exhale. "Well, we've definitely stirred something up, haven't we?" His tone was a mixture of awe and nervous excitement. Emily nodded, the faintest smile forming. "I think we have, but we didn't come this far just to walk away." They climbed into Emily's truck, silence stretching between them as they wound down the mountain roads. Yet in that silence there was a new clarity. Emily was certain that her survival from the war, her discovery of the dog family, and her encounters with those carved fragments were all entwined. What had once been a random chain of events now felt like a carefully laid path, leading her deeper into the heart of Appalachia's mystery. As the sun dipped below the ridges, Emily glanced at Earl. "We keep going," she said softly. He nodded in quiet agreement, and with that they drove on, hearts braced for whatever trials awaited them among the forests and hidden hollows of the Appalachian range. A crisp autumn morning found Emily Walker stepping into the Cedar Hollow Ranger Station once again, this time laden with evidence that would challenge even the most skeptical mind. She'd brought carefully labeled sketches in a sturdy portfolio alongside photographs of the massive stone fragments she and Earl had uncovered over the last few weeks. Her notebook, filled with observations and coordinates, bulged in the pocket of her windbreaker. Behind the main desk stood Ranger Claire Hensley, studying a stack of maps. When she spotted Emily, she set them aside and greeted her with a slight expectant nod. "You look determined," Claire said, noticing the purposeful gleam in Emily's eyes. Emily didn't waste time. She laid out the sketches, detailed renderings of swirling symbols, the huge stone hand, and a variety of partial carvings depicting wolves, eagles, and abstract shapes that resembled both Cherokee designs and cryptic military cartography. She followed with a series of photos showing each piece they'd found, some half buried by earth, others lying exposed near old creek beds. She spoke of Elder Ada Talltree's warnings and the hush that seemed to fall over the forest whenever they touched a fragment. She recounted Earl's uncanny knack for finding hidden gullies and ridges that concealed more fragments of what they now firmly believed was the Stone Sentinel. Claire listened intently, knuckles whitening around the edge of the station counter. By the time Emily finished, the ranger's expression had shifted from polite curiosity to stunned awe. "You really did find it," she breathed, tracing a fingertip over a photograph that showed a curved piece of carved stone with swirling motifs. "All these years I thought it was just an old rumor, something my father used to mention when he was telling campfire stories." Emily nodded. "It's real, and it's huge. Claire, Earl and I suspect the statue might be scattered all across the mountain. There's a sense of continuity, like we can piece it together if we recover enough fragments. But we're going to need help, official help." For a moment, Claire simply stared at the photos. Then she said, voice tight with emotion, "I'll do whatever I can. I have some influence with the local district office. If I show them these pictures, we might secure permission to do an official excavation or at least a preliminary survey." Relief shuddered through Emily. She'd half feared Claire would write her off as a conspiracy theorist. "Thank you," she murmured. "We can't do this alone." "Not anymore," Claire nodded, an air of resolution setting in. "Give me a day or two. I'll pull some strings, gather resources. If this stone sentinel is as significant as it looks, the entire region has a right to know." True to her word, Claire wasted no time. By week's end, Cedar Hollow buzzed with an excitement not felt in decades. Bulletin boards at the local post office and diner announced a call for volunteers, seeking individuals to assist in the possible unearthing of an ancient stone guardian. No experience required, just curiosity and willingness to help. Claire also contacted a nearby state university, piquing the interest of a small group of archaeology students, itching for real-world experience. Within days, a spirited team gathered at a clearing near the site where Emily had first found the giant stone hand. Camp chairs and pop-up canopies appeared, along with tables for cataloging artifacts and laptops for GIS mapping. The once quiet forest echoed with the hum of generators, the clang of metal tools, and the clamor of voices. Some folks came simply to watch history in the making. Others lugged supplies, ready to dig, brush away dirt, and haul fragments of stone under Claire's instruction. Rumors spread like wildfire in the small town. Older residents recalled half-forgotten stories about a giant in the hills, while younger people swapped excited whispers over coffee at the local diner. One man offered old family journals describing how his grandmother claimed to have seen a stony giant's arm after a landslide in her childhood. Another insisted that if the statue was reassembled, the mountains would awaken in some mystical sense. Emily found herself at the heart of this whirlwind. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, yet her sketches and notes became the primary guide for the volunteer team. She pinned enlarged photographs onto bulletin boards,
marking red circles around each discovered fragment and connecting them with pieces of string to form a growing map of possible statue location. Whenever anyone asked how she'd gotten involved, she told them about stumbling across the battered German Shepherd Sable near the Stone Hand, how that single event sparked a chain reaction of hope and curiosity. Many listened with rapt attention, drawn to the story of a war veteran inadvertently unearthing a legend older than any of them. With each new recruit, each archaeologist peering at her sketches, Emily felt the weight of her responsibilities swell. Yet she also sensed a deep camaraderie blossoming. It was no longer just her quest or Earl's lonely pilgrimage. It belonged to all of Cedar Hollow now, and perhaps to the broader region as well. News outlets from the next county over picked up the story when a local journalist wrote an article entitled "Awakening the Mountain: Cedar Hollow's Search for a Guardian." Within days, curious onlookers trickled in, some carrying cameras, others brandishing notebooks, eager to witness what one blogger called the reassembly of a myth. People swapped local legends, wove rumors of hidden treasure or supernatural forces. A sense of collective anticipation built in the crisp autumn air. Elderly townsfolk who'd once heard hush-hush tales of a giant statue came out of their homes, recounting fragments of oral tradition passed down through their families. A handful of them approached Emily directly, offering cryptic hints or old diaries they believed might help. In one dog-eared notebook, a woman showed Emily a pencil sketch her grandfather had made decades ago, an arm carved with swirling lines, eerily reminiscent of Emily's own drawings. "It's as if we're not just looking for rock," one volunteer remarked, pausing to wipe sweat from her brow. "We're digging for some part of ourselves we lost. Something about this place is, I don't know, sacred." Every day, more fragments surfaced. Some were small, a chunk of carved stone the size of a loaf of bread, faint lines dancing across its surface. Others were massive, requiring a truck winch and multiple hands to hoist free of the dirt. Each new piece felt like a revelation, spurring fresh enthusiasm. The forest itself seemed watchful, as though it approved of their effort. If the stone sentinel possessed any lingering spirit, it was guiding them. Late one afternoon, the site buzzed with activity. Excavators methodically cleared debris, while a cluster of archaeology students measured angles and took meticulous notes. Shovels clinked against stones, punctuated by the occasional exclamation when someone uncovered a promising shape. Off to the side, Emily stood near a large fragment that had recently been unearthed, a section of what appeared to be the Guardian's chest, carved with overlapping spirals that almost looked like the ridges of armor. She ran her hand over the cool surface, thinking of Daniel and the promise she'd made to see this through. Stepping back, she took in the swirling scene, volunteers comparing sketches, neighbors offering hot cider, and Claire coordinating the whole operation with a sure but excited voice. Even Earl had shown up, leaning on a shovel beside a newly exposed piece of the Guardian's upper arm. No longer were they just a small group of misfits chasing legends. They were a collective force, bridging generations, backgrounds, and beliefs to resurrect something lost to time. Emily felt a knot in her chest dissolve. For so long she had wandered in search of belonging, weighed down by grief and guilt. Now, with each dusty fragment placed on a pallet, she was forging connections to these people, to the Appalachian land, and to her own battered soul. "I think I've found my place," she whispered to herself, remembering how Daniel once told her she'd know when she was truly home. Nearby, a volunteer shouted in delight, and a round of applause rippled through the group. A new stone section, possibly part of the Guardian's massive torso, had come into view. The exhilaration in the air was palpable. Emily couldn't help but smile. She wasn't drifting anymore. This had become her mission, not just for Daniel or the war she survived, but for all the souls here who yearned to see something extraordinary reawaken in the ancient hills. As the project gained momentum, Emily found herself plagued by vivid dreams. Almost every night she slipped into a dreamscape of moonlit forest floors and rushing water, with Daniel's silhouette standing beside a half-submerged, colossal face, carved from stone. Each time, she awoke breathless, heart hammering in her chest. More than once, she caught herself murmuring Daniel's name into the dark cabin, the pups stirring in mild confusion. One night, the dream felt especially real. She stood at the edge of a wide stream, the water glowing silver in the moonlight. Daniel was there, uniform crisp as though he'd never been wounded, beckoning her to come closer. Behind him, a towering visage of carved rock lay hidden beneath swirling currents. Elder Ada Talltree's voice seemed to whisper from the treetops, "The most important part, buried in the waters that wash away pain." Emily jerked awake, tears streaking her cheeks. She could no longer deny what these dreams were telling her. The final and most crucial fragment of the stone sentinel was hidden somewhere deep in a place where the floodwaters once raged. She recalled the old stories about the hunter who disappeared in a flash flood, about the heartbreak in Liam Blackwood's voice. Everything pointed to the watery regions of Blackwater Creek, the hazard zone most avoided for decades. She rose from her creaky bed, a surge of determination flooding her veins. That's where the Guardian's face must be. With the excavation camp bustling, Emily waited for a lull in group activity before pulling Earl aside. She told him about the dreams, and her certainty that the Guardian's face lay submerged, or half buried near Blackwater Creek. Earl's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, recalling how powerful floods had reshaped that land. He agreed it was the likeliest place. They armed themselves with heavy boots, rope and a few tools. Emily also took a small waterproof camera and a sturdy flashlight. This area is known for sinkholes and pockets of quicksand-like mud, she explained. We'll have to be careful. Earl simply nodded. Neither of them voiced the deeper fear that they might find something that should remain hidden, or worse, become the flood's next victims. The weather played along with only a light drizzle in the forecast, and they timed their approach for a day when the creek ran at its lowest. The air carried a damp, earthy aroma, thick with decaying leaves and silt. As they waded into the shallows, the mud sucked at their boots, and the water rose to their shins. The battered logs lying along the bank told a story of violent past storm. Every step felt tenuous, as though the ground might vanish at any moment. Gnarled tree roots jutted out from eroded banks, some forming half-bridges over deeper pools. Once or twice, Emily swore she saw the bleached remains of old deer bones, a grim testament to the creek's hazard. Yet she pressed on, guided by a strange certainty that this was the rightful place. Time blurred. Emily and Earl carefully fanned out, searching for any sign of carved stone. It took hours of treading through slick gravel and brushing away layers of sediment from protruding rock. The creek's banks sloped in unpredictable ways, forcing them to backtrack and forge new routes. Water dripped down their necks, the cold seeping through thick layers of clothing. Still, an unspoken resolve held them firm. Finally, as the afternoon light dimmed behind thick clouds, Emily spotted a smooth curve peeking out from beneath a curtain of moss in the creek bed. Her heart jolted. She waded closer, calling for Earl. He hurried over, and together they crouched, scraping away grime and moss clump. The shape emerged bit by bit, the arc of what could be a cheekbone, then the outline of a firmly closed eye. "Oh my God," Emily breathed, her voice trembling. They cleared more debris to reveal half of a colossal face, stone lips pressed together, a broad nose, and a brow contoured with subtle artistry, even partially submerged. The craftsmanship was breathtaking. Every detail suggested a being of noble strength, as though the statue had once gazed over the entire mountain with silent guardianship. Emily placed her hand on the cheek, ignoring the frigid water. A surge of warmth spread through her fingertips, more potent than any fragment she'd touched before. Her eyes fluttered shut as a whirlwind of memory overtook her. Nights in a combat zone. Daniel's eyes brimming with love as he whispered reassurance. The chaos of her final mission, and her frantic attempts to save him. In this vision, however, Daniel smiled gently. "It's time," he seemed to say. "You have to let go, live for both of us." A sob tore from Emily's throat, and she sank to her knees in the shallow water. Earl knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Neither spoke as tears streamed down her cheeks. The confession she had never dared utter welled up in her chest. Grief, guilt, the anger at surviving while Daniel did not. And here, in the presence of the Guardian's face, she finally let them wash over her. It felt like the statue listened, absorbing the weight she'd carried for so long. In time, she pressed both palms against the slick stone. She remembered Ada's warning. The land demanded a price, but maybe that price was acceptance and vulnerability. "I forgive myself," she whispered, voice trembling. "I forgive the war for taking Daniel, and I forgive Daniel for leaving me. Let this stone hold our pain so we can move on." The water around her felt suddenly calmer, and the hush of the creek took on a reverent tone. Earl said nothing, but tears glistened in his own weary eyes. Regaining composure, Emily sniffed and met Earl's gaze. They both knew what had to be done. The Guardian's face needed to be brought back to Hollow's Rest, where the community had gathered the fragments. Though it looked massive, they realized parts of it could be carefully hoisted out if they had enough manpower and the right equipment. Securing ropes around the submerged edges, Emily and Earl heaved, managing to shift the face slightly. Mud slurped at the underside, reluctant to surrender the statue. Bit by bit, they freed the stone, revealing more swirling engravings near the temple, and the faint suggestion of a downward glance as if the guardian had closed its eyes in a final moment of mercy for the world. Before long, they'd pried it free enough to rest it on a patch of gravel just above the flowing water. Breathing heavily, Emily placed a hand on the guardian's forehead and whispered, "For everyone who lost themselves out here, let this be the place we leave our ghosts." The vow hung in the mist. She glanced at Earl, whose face held a haunted relief. Together, they stood in the twilight gloom, hearts pounding with the enormity of their find. Emily felt an almost electric sense of hope coiling in her gut. She had come to these mountains a broken soldier, and now she was kneeling beside the face of a being said to have protected this land eons ago. The notion that her personal grief might be one strand in a tapestry of communal healing filled her with awe. "Let's bring it home," she finally said. Earl nodded, and they set about preparing the final trek back to the main camp. They would need help. Yes, but Emily already sensed that the entire town would rally behind this discovery. This was more than stone or legend. It was the missing piece of a giant, one that symbolized the redemption and unity the mountain had quietly offered them from the start. Word spread swiftly through Cedar Hollow. Emily and Earl had found the guardian's face. Soon enough, a caravan of trucks, vans, and even a backhoe trundled out to the remote creek. With careful maneuvering and improvised pulleys, the community managed to haul the colossal face onto a sturdy truck bed. It took the better part of a day, and many exhausted arms, but the labor brought them closer. Neighbors, archaeologists, and volunteers working side by side. Then came the culminating moment, returning to Hollow's Rest, the clearing where all previously discovered fragments had been painstakingly assembled. The sun was low in the sky by the time the final piece arrived. Heralded by cheering townspeople and the barking of dogs, Elder Ada Taltree stood at the edge of the clearing, wrapped in her traditional shawl, eyes brimming with solemn pride. Claire Hensley directed the heavy machinery, ensuring no harm came to the rest of the statue. As the team gingerly lifted the guardian's face into position, the crowd fell silent. The hush was electric. One could almost hear the trees bend in the breeze, as though they too waited in anticipation. When at last the face slid into its rightful place atop the colossal form, each fracture line melded seamlessly, as if designed for this precise moment. A communal gasp rippled through the gathering. In the soft light of late afternoon, faint rays illuminated the guardian's face. Vines and newly cut rope dangled, but the statue stood whole, over 30 feet of chiseled stone, arms outstretched, bearing swirling designs that connected across each limb and chest plate like living veins of ancient artistry. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the clearing, spiraling leaves and dust into the air. It circled around the statue, creating a vortex of color. The onlookers shielded their eyes from the flurry, and in that surreal moment, it appeared as though the guardian itself inhaled the etched lines coursing with a subtle golden glow. No one moved, no one spoke, even the dog seemed transfixed. Elder Ada's voice trembled with emotion. The spirit of this land has returned." Though the stone figure did not literally open its eyes, there was an undeniable shift, as though an immense consciousness acknowledged the reverence offered by those gathered. The swirling patterns glowed for just a heartbeat longer, enough for everyone present to sense a living warmth envelop them. Then the light faded, leaving the guardian silent but indescribably changed. It felt less like an artifact, and more like a being sharing the space, weaving the forest and the people into a single tapestry of breath. Earl Macaulay broke first, tears slipping down his lined cheeks. He placed a calloused hand on the statue's leg, murmuring words only he could hear.
"I'm free," he managed, voice hitching. Finally free. Similar emotion flared throughout the clearing. Men and women wiped their eyes, leaning into each other with whispered confessions of wonder. Some stood hushed in prayer-like contemplation. Marla Green, who had tended Sable and the pups, patted Emily's shoulder with a tearful smile, as if to say thank you for bringing us together. As for Emily, she felt the tension that had coiled around her soul begin to melt. Sable pressed against her leg, tail wagging gently, while the puppies, now robust and healthy, bounded around, oblivious to the monumental moment. Emily gathered them close, the warmth of their little bodies a quiet reminder of how far she'd come. The memory of Daniel no longer cut her like a blade, but glowed softly in the corners of her mind. Affectionate and bittersweet, she pictured him standing in the ranks of lost souls who might also find solace in this forest's embrace. A hush settled again. People seemed reluctant to disturb the statue's newly completed aura. Instead, they simply stood, letting the breeze carry their shared reverence. Some said it felt like the mountain was exhaling for the first time in centuries, releasing an ancient breath of renewal. Twilight stole across the sky in gentle hues of purple and gold. In that fading light, Emily stepped forward, placing her palm against the guardian's massive foot. The carved lines still radiated a subtle warmth, echoing the heartbeat she once felt. She closed her eyes and spoke words that resonated in the hushed clearing. "I will stay," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Right here among these trees and stones, to keep this place alive and to keep the stories alive too." No drum roll followed her declaration, but a collective sense of peace spread across those watching. In that moment, Emily knew she had found her calling, a purpose that transcended war and law. She would become a caretaker of the land, of Sable, the pups, and the silent guardian whose existence bound the community and the mountain in a single narrative of resilience. Earl gave her an approving nod, understanding her choice without needing word. Claire stepped forward, a faint smile curving her lips. "We could always use a ranger's aide who knows these woods better than most," she said in a low voice. "If you're up for it," Emily nodded, tears briefly stinging her eyes. "I'd like that," she replied, voice thick with gratitude. Then she turned back to the guardian, tracing the swirling lines etched across its chest. "Thank you," she whispered, her words a private prayer for saving me, for saving all of us. Around her, people gradually resumed soft conversation, exchanging hugs, quiet laughter, and stories of what they'd witnessed. Yet the statue remained a looming, comforting presence, testament to an ancient alliance between humanity and the natural world. As night fell in full, lanterns glowed across Hollow's Rest, illuminating a circle of hope where darkness might otherwise prevail. At last, Emily guided Sable and the puppies away from the crowd, heading to a quiet corner of the clearing. She gazed up at the guardian's silhouette, dark against the star-flecked sky. She could almost hear Daniel's voice in the rustle of leaves. "Live on, for both of us." For the first time, she felt she truly could. Thus concluded the long journey of war, ghosts and The mountain had embraced her, forging a new life from the shards of her broken past. And the stone sentinel, long dormant, now watched over Appalachian's ridges again, stirring hearts to remember what lay buried beneath fear and time. In the hush of that sacred place, Emily Walker took her final vow. She was done running. She would stand guard, much like the guardian itself, over the land and the stories that bound them all in an unbreakable covenant of healing. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. As the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the horizon in hues of lavender and gold, Riley stood beside Nella, the loyal German shepherd who had changed her life. In that quiet moment, she reflected on everything: how loss had broken her, how courage had rebuilt her. The bond between them wasn't just companionship, it was survival. It was healing. She knelt to the ground, the puppies tumbling at her feet, and whispered, "We saved each other, didn't we?" Nella wagged her tail, as if she understood. From that day on, Riley knew she was no longer fighting her past. She was walking into her future with paws beside her and strength in her heart.